Yeah.
Remember when we did that? Shoot.
Well, now that everybody's seen that picture,
So Dominic, I don't think there's anybody else outside.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, well, thanks for coming to listen to me talk about some things. I hope it's riveting. We'll find out. So I'm Dominic Senibaldi. First of all, thanks to Brent and Michelle and Storage Space for showing my work and letting me talk about some of my work. So thank you, and thank you all again for coming to my artist talk. So I have some slides, and I'm just going to kind of maybe talk about what I call my weird day, which is sort of a metaphor for my weird life, which is just a metaphor for my regular life. So that's kind of where this is going to go. So part of the beginning, because we all have a beginning. So I'm from this state, which is Washington State. That's where I was born, where I grew up, where I met my wife. So when a lot of people think about Washington, this is sort of what they think about, which is very beautiful, idyllic, green. This is also what a lot of people think about when they think about Washington. I did live in Seattle after high school for a brief period of time, and the Space Needle is not that big, nor is it ever you'll never be in a position to see it as that big. I don't know like how they photograph it to make it look gigantic, but it's really small compared to the other buildings. That's not really relevant to anything, but I just find it interesting. So anyway, that's what a lot of people think about when I say, oh, I'm from Washington, but that's where I'm from. So I'm from the eastern side of the state, which if you sort of know your, I guess it's geography or geology and weather, things that are usually on the other side of coastal mountains are arid desert land. So that's kind of where I grew up. More specifically, this is my hometown of Spokane, Washington, which is about it's maybe like 30-45 minutes from Idaho. So it's pretty close to Idaho. It's really interesting, and I sort of found that as I lived in Indianapolis more, there was more things about Indy that reminded me of my hometown, specifically that Spokane is this sort of, everything east of the mountains in Washington is a red county politically. So, but Spokane's the one sort of little blue speck in this whole side of the state. So I found these kind of interesting correlations between where I grew up and Indianapolis. It is sort of this like sprawling, kind of suburban strip mall town, which is a really negative way for me to describe Indianapolis, because it's not how I feel about Indianapolis. I love it here. So anyway, that's kind of my backstory. That's where I'm from. If anyone has a question while I'm talking, feel free to just shout it out or raise your hand or however formal you want to be. You don't have to call me Mr. Senibaldi, but you can be formal or informal. I don't really care. So anyway, so some of the middle. So after Washington, I ended up moving with Chelsea, who's my partner. We moved to Chicago in 2009. I went to Chicago for part of my undergrad, and then I came to Indy in 2011 for graduate school. So when we first moved to Indianapolis, it was kind of a bit of a shock moving from Chicago, which Chicago was a shock from moving from Washington, but we kind of had that sort of standard period where we weren't really comfortable in the city till like right when we were leaving. This is in Chicago. So right when we left Chicago was kind of when we were like, wow, this is a really cool place, and we met some really cool people, and we started discovering a lot of cool things about the city, and then we had to leave. So that was sort of bittersweet in a way. So when I first came here for graduate school, it was kind of a strange place. I didn't really know what I was doing, hence why I'm showing this image, because it sort of kind of to me speaks about my confusion as to what I am, where I am, who I am, kind of really uninteresting things to think about in a way. They're very topical in my mind as far as like how my work was developing. But it was a good springboard for talking about some other ideas. But sort of one of the first culture shocks we had when we moved here was, it was the first weekend we were living here, and we were unpacking, and we tried to buy beer, and it happened to be a Sunday, and it was a very awkward interaction at the CVS. So that was kind of our first introduction to Indianapolis, and so we spent a few years just wondering, like, why did we move to this strange place? I was able to be a little distracted because I was doing my graduate work, so that was taking up a lot of my energy and a lot of my time. I don't know what slides are coming up. I forgot what I put in here, so it's going to be a surprise. So this was another, I started doing some photography while I was in graduate school with the help of some of my colleagues. And most of them became reference material for some prints that you'll kind of see later on in the slideshow. But again, I started to kind of like talk about these weird ideas of habits and sort of strange rituals and things like that. So that's why these kind of strange images started to take shape. But I was still sort of discovering like who I wanted to be as an artist and sort of what I wanted to talk about. And so sort of my work started to just talk about that confusion a little bit, and that sort of uncertainty, and kind of these like uncomfortable interactions with being in the world and sort of navigating, sort of just existing, especially as an artist, when as an artist I'm supposed to be talking about all those issues rather than just sort of dealing with them or internalizing them. I also started playing the banjo briefly. I don't have anything else to say about that. And this is just what I did in graduate school. So I made artwork, and then I dressed up as a wrestler on occasion with some of my friends. So some of the prints that started to take shape, I was doing a lot of self-portraiture. This next series of images are mostly lithographs, so I was working with a lot of printmaking while I was in graduate school. And again, they were sort of talking about kind of my confusion, and also this idea of made-up rituals. So like the idea of, you know, waking up in the morning and putting tape on your face, sort of a la Pee Wee Herman kind of thing. So that's sort of, again, I was developing these ideas just of that kind of confusion and strangeness, and sort of investigating, you know, how we are creatures of habit, and we are creatures of sort of ritual, or turning habits into rituals. You know, everything we do kind of becomes a ritual, you know, no matter how mundane it is, whether it's, you know, shaving, or whether it's preparing a meal, or taking a shower, or like clipping your fingernails, these sort of mundane activities that become ritualistic in a way for us to sort of attach a meaning to those activities and the things we kind of do as we sort of trundle along the world as these kind of like gooey, meat-filled sacks of, you know, existence. So, which it sounds really like nihilistic, but I think it's really beautiful. So, so again, like this is an example of taking sort of those photographic references and then turning them later into prints. I have both a Hamm's and a LaCroix. So again, the idea of like making up rituals, this was kind of this like shaving ritual, but I'm using this really large knife, and so it's kind of strange in that way. And I always kind of wanted to, like, can I go backwards? No, I don't want to talk about cat head yet. Oh my gosh. Okay, we're just gonna have to do this. Sorry.
I have a question about lithographs. Sorry.
Yeah, what's your question?
Is that where you're drawing on a stone? Is that right? And then
It
you
is.
print it? Okay.
Yeah, so it's a printmaking medium where you're drawing on a stone with a grease pencil, and then you're chemically treating the stone, and then you're able to roll that drawn image up with ink, and that's how you that becomes the matrix. You know, just like a wood block or a intaglio plate or something like that. I sort of lost my train of thought when I skipped around with slides there, so maybe we'll just move on. So anyway, so that ended up being sort of the bulk of my graduate work. And during graduate school, you know, there's sort of this path that you're put on as an artist, especially in graduate school. And I had always gone to graduate school and my build up to graduate school with the idea that I was going to get my master's in printmaking, and I was going to look for teaching jobs in college, you know, academic settings. And that was sort of the path that I kind of put myself on. That was the path that I thought was sort of the path that you were supposed to do. So that's kind of, you know, what was building up in my mind as I'm in graduate school and as I, you know, got close to graduation. Once I graduated, I did start looking for teaching jobs and very quickly find out it's not really how it was, you know, a few decades ago. I did start teaching right away, so I was very lucky. I did a sabbatical replacement at Heron where I went to graduate school, so I was able to start teaching right away, which is really good because it got me some experience after graduate school. It sort of helped me continue to foster connections and still be really sort of connected to the art scene and sort of what was happening in Indy at the time. And just sort of as a frame of reference, when I graduated, that would have been 2013. So if you can kind of think and visualize how sort of the city was in 2013, I think the Cultural Trail had just been finished. I know that the Fountain Square section was the lagging section, so I think it had just been finished. There were still a lot of things happening and things being developed and stuff like that, so that can kind of give you a frame of reference. So a few years after graduate school, I continued to teach at Heron. I kept doing that thing. I was applying to teaching jobs. Nothing was really happening. So I was getting a little discouraged. And at this point, I had yet to have a love affair with Indianapolis. I was still pretty not sure about the city. I kind of still felt that I wanted to get out of Indianapolis. But somewhere around, I think 2014 is when I got a studio at the Harrison Center, and my work really started taking off. I started doing a lot more work sort of independently outside of graduate school. It kind of took that year to kind of get some steam again. And once that happened, I'm not going to like really credit the Harrison Center specifically, but like I was being more engaged and I was meeting some new people. So I sort of started, my wife as well, you know, together we sort of started to develop this kind of a network of friends, you know, including, you know, the friends that I made in graduate school, a really cool group of people, both my cohort and some people that I just met while at Heron. And so we sort of really started developing this community of friends, and it sort of started to lift the veil of Indianapolis and kind of allowed us to put our guard down and maybe see some really cool things that were happening. So anyway, fast forward, I can't really give an artist talk without talking about Cathead Press, which is the print cooperative, print shop and artist cooperative that I run with Liz Worsbicky, who's over there. So yeah, I think it was somewhere around 2015 when my partner and I, we sort of decided that maybe we would stay in Indianapolis because we had started meeting a lot of cool people. We started going out into the city. There was a lot of cool things happening both in art and food and just a lot of really interesting things happening in the city, and we just really developed that community of people that takes a long time to develop. So we kind of started to get this idea that like, well, we don't want to start over, so let's maybe just make a home here. So once I sort of made that decision, like, hey, maybe we can just stay in Indianapolis, was when I was like, well, I've always wanted to start an artist cooperative, a print shop and artist cooperative, which is something that I was familiar with. You know, there's Sputnik Press in Chicago and Hoof Print Press or Hoof Print Workshop. You know, there's Hat Show Press down in Nashville, Anchor Graphics in Chicago. So the model that we sort of model Cathead Press off of is something that exists in a lot of different cities, but it's not something that I saw in Indianapolis. And that was always something, you know, from when I first started doing printmaking. You know, printmaking was always a community-based medium because, you know, with printmaking, not every single printmaker can have a press. You know, presses are big, they need space, they cost, you know, a litho press can cost up to $30,000, you know, so this equipment has been shared equipment. So that sort of idea of artists working together, an artist community, and a cooperative is kind of baked into the medium. So this idea of a print shop and a cooperative like sort of print shop space was something that was always on my mind from, you know, the first time I pulled a print, really, because it's just part of that culture of printmaking. So, you know, I kind of contacted some of my friends from graduate school. I was like, hey, I want to start this thing. Do you guys want to get in on it? And they all said yes, luckily. So we basically just got to work making Cathead Press. And this is Liz Worsbicky and Michael Hopeful, who's a founding member. He serves on our board now. But we ended up opening the doors of Cathead Press in 2016 in the summer. And we just did a lot of research. We, you know, talked to a lot of people and got a lot of advice, and through a lot of support, we were able to open up fairly quickly after the sort of inception of the idea. And we've been going pretty strong since then. It's been a lot of hard, sometimes painful work. And that's me and Rob painting the building. It looks better now. So sort of simultaneously, when I was starting Cathead Press, or when we were starting Cathead Press, I still had my studio at the Harrison Center. So the next few slides represent that sort of second phase of work, kind of directly out of graduate school. And you'll kind of notice, I didn't really actually notice till I was putting this slideshow together, but a lot of my work became more drawing based. This is graphite and colored pencil, and you'll see some of the other images are a lot more graphite. So they're not technically prints, and I think that was a lot of the part because I wasn't a printmaking student anymore. I wasn't in the print lab, you know, 10 hours a day, 7 days a week. I had a studio that didn't have a press. You know, I was teaching at Heron, but while I was at Heron, I was teaching, so I didn't really have that same freedom that you get in graduate school. So you'll see some of this work kind of deviates from actual prints. But this is sort of, this body of work was kind of happening while I was doing Cathead Press, while we were doing a lot of the work and research leading up to actually opening. So this is a pretty large scale drawing. I think this is on like a 30 by 40 sheet of paper or something like that. Still some portraiture, because you can see that my prints previously were a lot of self-portraiture, and they were, well, had sort of abstract picture plane and like strange elements. They were still pretty traditionally portraits. But as I sort of started to develop, I was sort of talking about the same things. It's a really sort of cliche way to state it, but I guess that's why things are cliches, because it's the easiest way to say something. But it was kind of this interaction between order and chaos, but I don't really like to use that. I sort of like to use structure and confusion is sort of how I start to talk about things. So I was still kind of, you know, I really related this image to like the image with the tape on my face. So there's this element of sort of structure and the kind of pixelated mark making and the structure of a face, you know, an eyeball, you can see an eye, you can see a mouth, but with these kind of gestural marks that sort of, to me, talked about this idea of confusion. So it was always still kind of investigating these two sort of opposing forces that always, to me, they can be opposing, but they're always sort of working in tandem with each other. You know, you can see structure and have structure in your life, but still be confused about things, or still see the sort of confusion in our sort of daily lives, or in our existence, or in the universe, for that matter. So that's where this kind of more abstracted work kind of started to take shape. And for some reason, I started working a little bit more minimally. You know, my images became less noisy in a way, but I still feel they're still kind of like fluid and lyrical. But again, you know, I was sort of distilling down a lot of the noise in my work, which was really interesting. This was probably, I think this is a lithograph. So this is actually a print. And I think This is probably from like 2016 or maybe 17, and I think it was maybe like the first print I pulled in a couple of years. That wasn't a demo print for students. So again, you know, kind of like distilling down some of my ideas. Again, still working with recognizable shapes, or these sort of, I really got interested in these, what are called impossible shapes, like the, what am I trying to think of? The Mobius strip, is that right? What I'm saying? Mobius? Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, but these sort of shapes that can't actually exist the way they sort of intertwine. So it's still a structural element, but it's illogical in a way, so I found something really interesting about that, but still always sort of having this human element in that idea of the kind of confusion and structure. So, any questions so far? This is probably going a lot quicker than I planned, it sort of always does. So that kind of, you know, talking about all these different things, you know, making work, running a nonprofit organization, having a home life, having a partner in my life, having friends. In the past couple of years, it started to make me think of this idea of balance and how I balance all of those things. I think as artists, and maybe just as people in general, just living in our society and culture, I think we're sometimes bombarded with a lot of guilt in our lives about things, whether that's from culture, society, or just from ourselves. And I think artists in general, this is my own experience, you may share this experience, but I think artists, you know, deal with this idea of feeling guilty about maybe not making work for a certain period of time, or focusing on other things. So I think I've sort of started to unpack that a little bit, and I've actually sort of been able to move past some of that guilt about maybe my, you know, I'm not making as much work, you know, I'm doing these other things, but to me it's all sort of balanced out, and I'm, you know, if I'm not making work, you know, it doesn't mean I'm not involved in the arts, or I'm not doing something in a community. That's all sort of feeding into everything else. So that kind of brought me to this idea of balance, and sort of, I guess in a way, the inspiration for my new work, which is finding interests, because I have a lot of interests in my life, which you're going to see in these next slides. So this is a heap of trash. I like heaps of things, whether it's a heap of food, or a heap of trash, or a heap of paper, or pillows on the couch, or like a heap of cats, because I have 5 cats. So a lot of my life, you know, I sort of think of it as maybe a freer form of compartmentalizing things. You know, if you sort of heap things, I think it's maybe less structured. So again, it's that idea of like structure and confusion. But anyway, this is my backyard, which is probably not the best place to have my heap of garbage, because I think there's a possum living in it. Maybe in this, I wonder if I can draw with this.
Something else that likes to eat?
Maybe in this hole right here, this one right here, there might be a possum living in there, I'm not sure. But anyway, so we bought a house in, when did we buy the house?
2017.
Oh, there you are. Oh, there you are. So we bought a house a couple years ago now, and it's definitely a fixer-upper. It was livable, but there was a lot of weird stuff in it. If you talk to Chelsea, she can show you pictures of what it looked like when we moved in. But anyway, so basically the first day we closed on the house, before we moved anything in, the kitchen was gutted and there was a giant hole in the living room wall. So this is a lot of demo material from doing these sort of projects. So I love to work on my house. I love, you know, ripping things apart. I love making things out of wood. I love building things. You know, I've been watching this old house since I was a kid. I do lots of research about things. So that was definitely, when we first bought the house, that a lot of my energy was going towards, you know, making this the home that I wanted to live in. So that was sort of like, I started developing this interest. I was learning a lot. So that was sort of interesting way that I spent my time and sort of prioritized some of my, I guess, free time. So these are some of my other projects. I collect tape measures. And then I started doing tiling, which, you know, I had to watch like 30 videos of people on this old house tiling before I actually built the confidence to tile a wall. So this is a lot of the work I've been doing on my house. I also really like to cook. I'm sorry if anyone's vegetarian, because this is a big pile of meat. But that's what it is. So I do a lot of cooking. So this is beef. I think I made a bolognese or something. You should always season your meat before you cook with it, and mix it in. And you always should like massage your meat, whether it's it sounds really weird. But anyway, you always need to mix in your seasoning, because if you just put seasoning on the top of your meat, then the seasoning's not in the meat, it's just on the top, and you can taste it throughout the whole dish. So anyway, I've been doing a lot of cooking. My cooking sort of has taken off in the past few years, partially because of a lot of the great food that we have going on in Indianapolis right now. There's a lot of amazing restaurants, big and small places. So I do a lot of cooking at home, and I watch a lot of cooking shows. It's probably not good, but I buy a lot of like cooking magazines at the grocery store that I don't end up reading. I just look at them in the moment. I'm like, oh, that's cool, and then I buy it, and it's like a $12 cooking magazine. So I should probably stop doing that, but whatever. It's what I'm into. And so making dishes like this and things like that. So I don't think anyone should be afraid of plating their food. I think it makes me happy, but and it doesn't take a lot of more energy. The perfect way to fry an egg is you get the pan to like medium high, and then take it off the heat and crack it, and then cover it. And you should always season it before you cover it. So that's the perfect way to cook a fried egg, and then you just let it sit for like 2 or 3 minutes, and then it's just perfect. You should always have a little bit, this may gross some people out, but you should always have the little bit of white should still be clear just around the yolk. That's the perfect fried egg, which that was the perfect fried egg. I remember that meal. I made this at 10 o'clock at night when I got home. If anyone follows my Instagram, you'll see a lot of these pictures, so sorry, I kind of did a social media photo dump. And then, mise en place, which is getting everything ready, so you should always prepare your spices and your ingredients before you actually turn the burner on, because that's the way that you stay organized and that things move quickly. And again, you'll see some heaps of spices. You'll also see some heaps of spices in the show, if you look really closely. That's lemongrass. And then that sort of takes me to my most recent work, and this is sort of, I guess if I had to break this last little section down into 3 parts, this is sort of, I had my sort of home life, working on my house, my cooking, and now my artwork. So this work sort of, to me, represented, it's kind of interesting that it is the artwork, but it also represents the balance of those kind of different things in my life and the different things that I choose to sort of spend my energy doing, and the things that I focus on and the things I'm passionate about. So a lot of this new work, came from elements of those different interests in my life that I've sort of started developing in the past couple of years. So a lot of these wooden pieces are actually the lath that came out of my house. So it's in old houses they did horsehair plaster instead of drywall. So it was strips of probably some pine, probably old growth that no longer exists. But they put the lath up, and then you cover it with horsehair plaster. And I got really freaked out when I was doing some demo work, because you see the horsehair in the plaster, but I was really ignorant about horsehair plaster and the difference between that and what asbestos actually looks like. And I just saw fibers and I thought asbestos. And I called my really good friend Nick, who lives on the Near East Side with us, and he works on houses, as he runs a small nonprofit that they kind of fix up houses, and he does a lot of work on his own house. But I was like, dude, is this asbestos? He's like, dude, you're fine, don't worry about it. It's fine. So anyway, it wasn't asbestos, but it freaked me out. So anyway, these pieces of wood are some of that lath, and it was interesting because I actually pulled these out of that sort of heap in my backyard. They kind of got a nice patina on them. And then I took them to a wood shop and actually planed them all down so they're really nice and smooth. And you can kind of see that nice grain in those. So I sort of was using these remnants of kind of these projects that I worked on and then doing these kind of small scale graphite drawings on top of those and sort of going back to the drawn image, which is just, you know, the mechanics of how I make work. I just love drawing, which kind of sounds simple, but that's just what I like to do. And then these were some pieces I started playing around with, where I was actually taking some of that lath that I planed down and laminating a bunch of pieces together. So just gluing them up and then clamping them. And then so almost creating like plywood in a sense. And then actually cutting these shapes out of them and then working with sort of paint and graphite and kind of using them as drawing substrates. And it all sort of happened organically, which is kind of interesting. As I started to develop this work, and then sort of moving to what's actually in the show. You know, some of the things are just sort of practices in how light's reflected and shape and color. You know, I found these neon paints that I really thought were interesting. And the little, if you see the show, the little sort of strips or bands that I put on the shelf, that kind of happened as I was installing. Because I noticed that the white shelves, how much white light they were reflecting onto the wall, and I was like, well, if I had some neon paint, it'll reflect the neon color. So that kind of happened organically as I was installing the show. I like how it worked out. And then this is one of those laminated pieces actually installed on the wall. So that's kind of the end of this presentation. So that's kind of all I have. I hope that was interesting. Does anyone have any questions?
What would you say to Bob Vila?
I guess I'd say thanks.
How about Gordon Ramsay?
I just want a hug from him. And then he could yell at me. I guess I'd take Bob Vila yelling at me too. It's cool to have someone you admire like tell you you're doing something wrong, so I guess that would be cool. It's interesting though because I actually never really watched This Old House when Bob Vila was on, because he was only on for a few seasons, and then it was am I blanking on his name? Tom Silva. Who's like, if I met Tom Silva, I would just be like a complete mess because he's like my hero. And I keep tagging him on Instagram, and I did get a like and a comment from Kevin O'Connor, who's the host of This Old House once, so that really made my day. But Tom Silva still hasn't responded to anything. I've also like tagged Maddie Matheson a bunch, who's one of my heroes in the cooking world, and he still has yet to respond to anything. But what are you gonna do?
Who are your favorite local chef heroes?
Well, my buddy Chris Benedict that runs Love Handle, like he's one of my best buds. I met him when I met Chris. It was so funny. It's kind of a weird story, but when Love Handle was first opening, it was when Pogues was still in business, and we were like having a sandwich in Pogues, and Chelsea and I were like, why the fuck is there another sandwich shop opening up like right across the street from the co-op, you know? So it was kind of funny because I was like really down on it for a second, but then we like moved into the neighborhood, and then like, oh, let's go to, I think we went there before we actually moved onto the east side. But like it was great, and I loved it, and like Chris is this like beautiful person, and like he kind of instantly like was talking to us. And then we moved into the neighborhood, and we were literally going there like almost like twice a week. And then him and I just started hanging out, and we started playing music together. So I think he's like got a really good heart, and he's just a cool guy to hang out with. So, and then my buddy Josh, who's the head chef at Milktooth right now, he's one of my, I guess, like local heroes, because he's just a really cool dude, and we talk food all the time, and he's like always like complimenting me on my food and stuff, so it's kind of a cool exchange. So yeah.
I had a question about Cathead.
Yeah.
So I know you talked about it being like a collective thing. You had how many other founders was it?
We had 4 founders, so it was myself, Liz, Marna Shopoff, and Michael Hopeful. We're all founding members, and now Marna and Michael both serve on our board of directors.
Did you guys kind of like, with how expensive the equipment is and getting started up and everything, did you guys just kind of like pool your money together? Did you have like sponsors or people in the community to help you guys out? Or?
A little bit of both. So it was sort of I guess the first part to answer that question is a lot of the work we did before we asked anybody for money, before we spent any money. We did so much research, and we made so many documents, and we really baked the idea and really came up with a solid plan of what we wanted to do, and all of that, and that was like months and months of meeting and work, and all of that preliminary work is really what helped us get the amazing amount of support we did really quickly, because we started having some meetings, and we had this packet we could show to people, and sort of right off the bat we got a large grant from Ephraimson, which basically was our startup money, and it was because we did so much work and we assembled a really good group of people to talk to. Our board president, Brian McCutcheon, who owns Ignition Arts, he was able to kind of help us talk with some people, and people just really loved the idea, and we just really pitched it really well. So we got that sort of seed money, but kind of before that we pooled our money to buy a litho press from Chicago that Michael and I had to drive, take apart, get on a flatbed, put it in my garage, reassemble it, and then take it apart again to move it into the shop. So that was fun. So we pooled our money for that. And then Michael had like a Lowe's black card. So we put a lot of, started charging a lot to that. But luckily once we got some grant money, he was obviously able to reimburse himself. But yeah, so I mean it was kind of this, we put all these kind of pieces in place, and I think doing that research and preparing and really, like I said, baking that idea is really what helped us. If we hadn't done that, I don't think we would have gotten the support that we did. Did that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
You talked a bit about the guilt you felt when you don't make art.
Mhm.
That's very relatable to me.
Mhm.
So I'm just curious, what are your coping methods, or what do you do?
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I don't really feel the guilt anymore. I definitely did, and it took me a while to kind of get over that. And I guess sort of the main way I kind of coped with that, or sort of unpacked or navigated that idea, was really recognizing and telling myself what I wanted to spend my energy doing at a particular time, not like big picture stuff, and also just sort of telling myself like what was a priority at the time. And if I really didn't want to spend the energy making artwork in a given moment, then I just had to tell myself that's not a priority for me right now. And that sort of allowed me to kind of like, well, what is a priority? Well, demoing my houses, or like trying to find health insurance or something, so it's like, but yeah, so I don't know, I'm probably not answering your question very well, but it's, I think we all kind of, as artists, we get in these kind of lulls of making work, and I think that's just the ebb and flow of how we are as people. And I think if you have the passion, and it's something that you really want to spend the energy doing, I think it'll come organically, and a person can get back into that. Yeah, so I don't know. It's just really recognizing like in the immediate, like where are your priorities and where do you want to put your energy? Because sometimes it's not making artwork.
Yeah.
And sometimes it is again. So, but I mean, not to like, I don't want to give you like a huge pep talk or anything, but like, I mean, I see you at artist talks all the time. I see you at galleries. So I mean, like, that's what I told myself too, especially with having Cathead, because I was putting so much energy into that. I was like, you know, I'm not making artwork, which is like what I am like, you know, 6 figures in debt for, and like all this kind of stuff, but like I'm involved in the arts, I'm doing things in the arts, I'm consuming art, and I'm around people that are making art, and like sometimes that's good enough and that enriches your life, so you know, you should feel good about that.
Yeah.
So. Other questions?
What are your
2, 3.
cats' names?
What are my cats' names? Merlin is my boy. He's my best bud. So there's Merlin. Frodo's also my best bud. Well, they're all my best friends. But Frodo, Merlin, we have Pickle, and Olive, and Juno. And they're all jerks, and they're all lovely. Other questions? Okay, I'm done talking. Thank you.
It's gonna be a worm yeah, each month.
I don't think so. Interesting. Oh, okay. That's funny. No, it wasn't. Yeah, I don't think I've ever. I know.